The prison architect who built his own cage. Architect Jonathan Pierce had designed 14 maximum security prisons during his 25-year career, creating the most advanced containment systems in American corrections. His supermax facilities were escape-proof fortresses that housed the nation's most dangerous criminals. But when Jonathan was convicted of murdering his business partner in a financial dispute, he was sentenced to life without parole in ADX-Colorado, a prison he had personally designed to be inescapable, and now he would spend the rest of his life testing just how well he had built his own cage. Welcome to Justice System USA, where we explore the devastating ironies that emerge when systems turn against their creators. I'm your host, and today, we're examining a story that asks, what happens when the architect of despair becomes its ultimate victim? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and if you believe these stories of poetic justice deserve examination. Subscribe and join our community that confronts uncomfortable truths. The master of human containment. Jonathan Pierce stood in his corner office on the 47th floor of a Denver skyscraper, reviewing blueprints for what would become his final prison design. At 49, he was considered the foremost expert in maximum security correctional architecture, responsible for designing some of the most impenetrable facilities in the American prison system. Jonathan was a tall, lean man with prematurely silver hair, steel gray eyes, and the kind of precise attention to detail that made him exceptional at creating structures designed to contain dangerous human beings. His office walls displayed architectural drawings, security diagrams, and photographs of the 14 maximum security prisons he had designed during his career. His specialty was supermax facilities, ultra-high security prisons designed to house the most dangerous criminals in complete isolation. Jonathan's prisons were engineering marvels that eliminated human contact, natural light, and any possibility of escape or communication with the outside world. They were designed not just to contain bodies, but to break spirits. Pierce and Associates, the architectural firm Jonathan had founded 15 years earlier, had become the go-to designer for federal and state correctional systems that needed facilities capable of holding terrorists, serial killers, and other criminals who posed extreme security risks. His designs were studied in criminal justice schools and copied by prison systems. Worldwide, Jonathan's approach to prison design was coldly analytical. He studied criminal psychology, consulted with correctional officers about security vulnerabilities, and incorporated the latest surveillance technology to create facilities that were virtually impossible to escape from. His prisons featured automated doors, redundant security systems, and layouts designed to prevent inmates from communicating with each other or coordinating any kind of resistance. The crown jewel of Jonathan's career was ADX-Colorado, officially known as the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. Located in Florence, Colorado, it was often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies and housed the most dangerous federal prisoners, including terrorists, spies, and mass murderers. Jonathan had spent 3 years designing ADX-Colorado, creating a facility that represented the pinnacle of human containment technology. The prison featured 490 individual cells, each designed to prevent human contact and psychological stimulation. Inmates spent 23 hours a day in windowless concrete boxes, with 1 hour of solitary exercise in slightly larger concrete boxes. His design philosophy for ADX-Colorado was simple: create an environment so psychologically devastating that even the most hardened criminals would be broken by the isolation and hopelessness. The facility was designed to be a place where dangerous people would be forgotten by the world, left to exist in conditions that bordered on sensory deprivation. Jonathan took professional pride in the fact that no one had ever escaped from any prison he had designed. His security systems were so comprehensive, and his understanding of human psychology so precise, that escape was not just difficult, it was impossible. He had created perfect cages for imperfect human beings. But Jonathan's personal life was far less controlled than his professional designs. His marriage to Linda had ended in divorce 5 years earlier, partly due to his obsessive focus on work and his inability to form emotional connections with people he saw primarily as security problems to be solved. His business partnership with Marcus Webb, a structural engineer who had helped develop the technical systems for Jonathan's prison designs, had become increasingly strained over financial disagreements and creative differences about the direction of their firm. That business relationship was about to become the catalyst for Jonathan's transformation from architect to inmate. The partnership dissolves. Pierce and Associates had grown into a $50 million company during the 15 years since Jonathan founded it, with Marcus Webb serving as chief technical officer and minority partner. Their collaboration had produced some of the most innovative prison designs in the world, combining Jonathan's architectural vision with Marcus's engineering expertise. But success had created tensions between the two men that reflected their different philosophies about the purpose of prison design. Jonathan viewed their work as a pure technical challenge, creating structures that could contain dangerous people efficiently and securely. Marcus had begun questioning the psychological impact of their designs and advocating for more humane conditions in the facilities they created. Jonathan, we're not just building cages, Marcus argued during one of their increasingly frequent disagreements. We're creating environments that will house human beings for decades. We have some responsibility to consider the psychological effects of total isolation. Jonathan's response reflected his clinical approach to their work. Our job is to protect society from dangerous criminals, not to provide therapy for people who have forfeited their right to comfort. The more miserable these facilities are, the more effective they are as deterrents. The philosophical differences became financial conflicts when Marcus's proposed developing designs for rehabilitation-focused facilities that could compete for contracts with progressive correctional systems. Jonathan saw this as a betrayal of their brand and a waste of resources that should be invested in expanding their security-focused designs. Their partnership agreement gave Jonathan majority control over business decisions, but it also entitled Marcus to 40% of company profits and a voice in major strategic choices. When Jonathan unilaterally rejected Marcus's rehabilitation proposals and signed contracts for 3 new supermax facilities without consulting him, Marcus threatened to dissolve their partnership and start a competing firm. You've become obsessed with creating human misery, Marcus told Jonathan during what would be their final business meeting. I'm not going to spend the rest of my career helping you torture people in concrete boxes. Jonathan's response was calculated and devastating. You're welcome to leave, but you won't be taking any clients, designs, or proprietary technology with you, and you'll find that competing against me in this industry is more difficult than you think. The legal battle that followed was vicious and public, with both men hiring aggressive attorneys and making accusations that damaged their reputations within the correctional industry. Marcus alleged that Jonathan had been inflating construction costs and billing clients for unnecessary security features to increase profits. Jonathan countered that Marcus was attempting industrial espionage and planning to steal proprietary designs for his own company. At Justice System USA, we explore how professional conflicts can escalate into personal tragedies that destroy everyone involved. If this story is resonating with you, share it with someone who understands how success can become its own prison. The partnership dissolution became increasingly personal as both men sought to gain advantage through character assassination and strategic leaks to industry publications. Their conflict attracted attention from federal regulators, who began investigating potential irregularities in Pierce and Associates' government contracts. The investigation would ultimately reveal financial improprieties that went far beyond the original partnership. Disputant would cost Jonathan everything he had built over 25 years. The murder. On November 3, 2023, Marcus Webb was found dead in his home office from a single gunshot wound to the head. The murder occurred 3 days before a scheduled deposition in which Marcus was expected to provide detailed testimony about alleged financial irregularities in Pierce and Associates' federal prison contracts. The crime scene investigation revealed that Marcus had been working late on documents related to the partnership dissolution when he was killed. His computer contained emails indicating that he had discovered evidence of systematic overbilling on federal contracts and was planning to provide this information to prosecutors investigating the company. Jonathan Pierce became the primary suspect. Within hours of the murder's discovery, he had been seen arguing with Marcus at a restaurant the evening before the killing, and security cameras recorded him driving past Marcus's house twice on the night of the murder. Most damning was the discovery of the murder weapon, a .45 caliber pistol, registered to Jonathan, discarded in a dumpster 3 blocks from Marcus's home. Jonathan's defense attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Jonathan was being framed by unknown parties who wanted to silence both partners in the business dispute. But the prosecution built a compelling case based on motive, opportunity, and physical evidence that placed Jonathan at the crime scene. The trial lasted 6 weeks and attracted national media attention due to Jonathan's prominence in the correctional industry and the irony of a prison designer facing life imprisonment. Expert witnesses testified about Jonathan's knowledge of security systems and his ability to plan and execute the perfect crime using techniques he had learned from designing facilities to prevent exactly such crimes. Jonathan's defense collapsed when prosecutors revealed financial records showing that he had been embezzling money from Pierce and Associates for years, using a complex scheme involving inflated construction costs and phantom security upgrades. Marcus's murder had been an attempt to prevent disclosure of the embezzlement and to maintain control over contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy to defraud the federal government. Jonathan Pierce was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served at ADX-Colorado, the maximum security facility he had personally designed. Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the sentence with particular attention to the irony of the situation. Mr. Pierce, You have spent your career designing facilities intended to contain the most dangerous criminals in our society. You will now experience firsthand whether your designs achieve their intended purpose of preventing escape and eliminating hope. Arrival at ADX-Colorado on March 15, 2024. Jonathan Pierce arrived at ADX-Colorado as federal prisoner. Number 478-29019. He was transported in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, processed through the same intake procedures he had designed to be as dehumanizing and psychologically devastating as possible. The intake process included strip searches, cavity searches, psychological evaluations, and assignment to a cell in the most secure wing of the facility. Jonathan was classified as a high-risk prisoner due to his intimate knowledge of the facility's security systems and his potential ability to exploit weaknesses in his own design. Cell number 487. In Hequinit was a concrete box measuring 7 feet by 12 feet, with a narrow window that provided no view of the outside world and a steel door with a small slot for food delivery. The cell contained a concrete bed, a stainless steel toilet sink combination, and a small desk attached to the wall. There was no television, no radio, and no contact with other prisoners. Jonathan's first night in ADX-Colorado was spent staring at walls he had designed to be psychologically oppressive, lying on a concrete slab he had specified to be uncomfortable, and listening to the mechanical sounds of security systems he had personally selected for maximum psychological impact. The reality of his situation hit him with devastating force. He had created the perfect prison, and now he was its perfect prisoner. The architect's perspective, Jonathan's experience as an inmate in his own facility provided him with insights into prison design that no architect had ever possessed. Every detail of his daily existence had been planned by him years earlier, when he was focused solely on security and containment rather than the human experience of imprisonment. The lighting system he had designed to prevent prisoners from maintaining normal circadian rhythms now disrupted his own sleep patterns, causing insomnia and depression. The ventilation system he had specified to minimize comfort now made his cell alternately too hot and too cold. The acoustic design he had created to prevent communication between cells now subjected him to constant mechanical noise that made concentration impossible. Most psychologically devastating was the complete isolation that Jonathan had designed to break prisoners' spirits. He had no contact with other inmates. Guards spoke to him only when necessary for security purposes, and his only human interaction occurred during brief medical evaluations and legal consultations. The 1 hour of daily exercise he was permitted took place in a concrete recreation box slightly larger than his cell, with no equipment, no views, and no human contact. Jonathan had designed these recreation areas to provide the minimum physical activity required by law, while offering no psychological relief from the monotony of solitary confinement. Jonathan began to understand that his architectural choices had not been purely technical decisions, they had been deliberate acts of psychological warfare against people who would spend decades experiencing the environments he had created. The clinical efficiency he had prided himself on was actually a systematic assault on human sanity, designed to break people's minds through sensory deprivation and social isolation. The irony was profound. Jonathan had spent 25 years perfecting the science of human suffering, and now he was its most educated victim. The psychological breakdown. Within 6 months of his imprisonment, Jonathan began experiencing severe psychological symptoms that he recognized as the intended effects of his own design. The isolation, sensory deprivation, and elimination of meaningful activity were producing exactly the mental breakdown he had engineered the facility to create. He developed symptoms of depression, anxiety, and paranoia that were documented in his medical records, but provided no basis for transfer to a less restrictive facility. Jonathan had specifically designed ADX-Colorado to house prisoners with serious mental illness, and his own deteriorating psychological condition only confirmed that the facility was operating as intended. Sleep became irregular and fragmented. Due to the lighting and noise systems he had specified, Jonathan found himself staying awake for days at a time, then crashing into periods of unconsciousness that provided no rest. The sleep deprivation compounded his other psychological symptoms and made rational thinking increasingly difficult. Most disturbing was Jonathan's growing obsession with the design flaws and security vulnerabilities in his own facility. His architectural knowledge allowed him to identify weaknesses in the structure that other prisoners would never notice. But his understanding of the security systems also made him realize that exploitation of these flaws was impossible. Jonathan began sketching architectural modifications on toilet paper. Using pencil lead extracted from the small writing implements he was occasionally permitted, the sketches showed increasingly elaborate and impossible escape plans that demonstrated both his continuing architectural expertise and his deteriorating grip on reality. His architectural training had taught him to think systematically about problems and design elegant solutions, but prison had eliminated his access to the tools, materials, and freedom necessary to implement any solutions. The intellectual capacity that had made him successful as an architect became a source of torture when applied to the problem of his own confinement. At Justice System USA, we examine how systems designed to break human beings often succeed beyond their creators' expectations. Jonathan Pierce's story shows us the true cost of building institutions that prioritize control over humanity. The fellow inmates. Although ADX-Colorado was designed to prevent prisoner communication, Jonathan gradually became aware of the other inmates housed in his wing of the facility. The population included terrorists, spies, mass murderers, and organized crime leaders, the type of criminals his facility had been designed to contain. Through brief encounters, during medical appointments, and occasional glimpses during cell transfers, Jonathan encountered men whose crimes were among the most horrific in American criminal history. These were the people he had built ADX-Colorado to house, and now he was living among them as an equal in the eyes of the correctional system. One prisoner who occupied a cell near Jonathan's was Theodore Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose mail bombing campaign had killed 3 people and injured dozens of others. Another was Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who had sold intelligence to the Soviet Union for over 20 years. These were men whose crimes had motivated the creation of facilities like ADX-Colorado. The irony was not lost on Jonathan that he was now serving a life sentence alongside men whose containment had justified his career. The architect who had built cages for monsters had become a monster himself, at least in the eyes of the justice system that had convicted him of murder. But Jonathan's interactions with his fellow inmates revealed a more complex reality than his architectural philosophy had assumed. Many of the men in ADX-Colorado were highly intelligent, articulate, and capable of forming genuine human connections, despite their horrific crimes. The dehumanization that Jonathan had designed into the facility was being applied to people who retained their humanity even after committing inhuman acts. This recognition forced Jonathan to confront uncomfortable questions about the purpose and morality of the facility he had created. Was the psychological torture of supermax confinement justified by the crimes these men had committed? Did anyone deserve to be subjected to the conditions he had designed, regardless of what they had done? The legal appeals. Jonathan's conviction had been based on strong but not overwhelming evidence, and his defense attorneys continued to pursue appeals that challenged both the guilty verdict and the life sentence. The appeals process provided Jonathan with one of his few connections to the outside world and a theoretical possibility of eventual freedom. But the appeals also forced Jonathan to confront the reality that even if his conviction were overturned, his reputation and career had been permanently destroyed. The financial fraud investigation had revealed systematic corruption in Pierce and Associates that went beyond the murder case, and Jonathan faced potential civil lawsuits from clients who had been overcharged for prison construction projects. More troubling for Jonathan was the growing recognition that his imprisonment might be justified even if he hadn't murdered Marcus Webb. His designs had subjected thousands of prisoners to psychological torture that violated basic principles of human dignity, and his embezzlement had defrauded taxpayers of millions of dollars that should have been used for legitimate correctional purposes. The appeals process moved slowly through federal courts, with each stage taking months or years to resolve. Jonathan's lawyers argued that his conviction was based on circumstantial evidence and that alternative suspects had not been adequately investigated. But the prosecution's case remained strong, and higher courts showed little inclination to overturn the conviction. During the appeals process, Jonathan learned that Pierce and Associates had been dissolved and that several of his former employees had been charged with conspiracy in the financial fraud scheme. The architectural firm he had spent 15 years building had been completely destroyed by the criminal investigation that followed Marcus's murder. The reflection. After 3 years in ADX-Colorado, Jonathan had developed a perspective on prison design that no architect had ever possessed, the viewpoint of someone experiencing the full psychological impact of supermax confinement. His daily existence was a case study in the effectiveness of his own architectural choices. The facility was working exactly as Jonathan had designed it to work. The isolation was complete, escape was impossible, and the psychological pressure was systematically breaking down his mental health. From a technical standpoint, ADX-Colorado was performing flawlessly, but Jonathan's experience as an inmate had taught him that the technical success of his design represented a moral failure. Of imagination, he had created a facility that was extraordinarily effective at containing human bodies while systematically destroying human minds, and he was now discovering that no crime justified the psychological torture he had engineered. The recognition that he had spent his career creating deliberate human suffering forced Jonathan to examine his own psychological motivations for becoming a prison architect. Had he been driven by genuine concern for public safety, or by a deeper fascination with power and control over other human beings? Jonathan began writing detailed analyses of ADX-Colorado's psychological effects. documenting the ways in which his design choices were impacting his own mental health and that of other prisoners. The writing became both a form of therapy and a record of the human cost of supermax confinement. His architectural training provided him with unique insights into the relationship between physical environment and psychological state. Jonathan could identify specific design elements that contributed to depression, anxiety, and disorientation, and he began developing alternative approaches that could maintain security while preserving human dignity. But his proposals for more humane prison design would remain theoretical exercises unless he could somehow communicate them to architects and correctional officials who were still designing new facilities. The revelation: in his fourth year at ADX-Colorado, Jonathan experienced a psychological breakthrough that fundamentally changed his understanding of imprisonment, justice, and human nature. The breakthrough occurred during a period of severe depression when he was contemplating suicide as an escape from the psychological torture of his confinement. Jonathan realized that his facility had been designed not just to contain dangerous criminals, but to eliminate their humanity through systematic psychological abuse. The supermax model that he had pioneered was based on the assumption that some people were so dangerous that they forfeited their right to be treated as human beings. But Jonathan's experience as an inmate had taught him that retaining humanity was possible even under the most dehumanizing conditions. Despite being isolated, surveilled, and subjected to constant psychological pressure, he remained capable of growth, reflection, and moral evolution. This recognition led Jonathan to a more profound understanding of the purpose of imprisonment. Rather than focusing solely on punishment and containment, correctional facilities could be designed to maintain security while preserving the possibility of redemption and human development. Jonathan began developing architectural concepts for facilities that could house dangerous criminals safely while providing opportunities for education, therapy, and meaningful human contact. His designs incorporated advanced security technology with humane living conditions that recognized the dignity of all people, regardless of their crimes. The new designs represented a complete reversal of Jonathan's previous philosophy, replacing psychological warfare with environmental psychology that could support rehabilitation rather than destruction. The Legacy Project: Jonathan's transformation from architect of despair to advocate for humane corrections led him to develop what he called the Legacy Project, a comprehensive redesign of ADX-Colorado that would maintain security while eliminating the psychological torture elements of his original design. The project included modifications to lighting systems that would restore normal circadian rhythms, ventilation improvements that would provide comfort without compromising security, and common areas where prisoners could interact safely under supervision. Most importantly, the redesign incorporated educational and vocational facilities that would provide meaningful activity and the possibility of personal growth. Jonathan's architectural expertise allowed him to develop security solutions that were more sophisticated than simple isolation. His new designs used technology and spatial planning to prevent violence and escape while preserving human dignity and psychological health. The Legacy Project became Jonathan's obsession and his path to psychological redemption. Working on designs that could reduce human suffering rather than create it provided him with a sense of purpose that helped him survive the psychological pressure of his own confinement. But Jonathan faced the challenge of communicating his ideas to the outside world from within a facility designed to prevent such communication. His legal mail was monitored, his visitors were limited, and his access to research materials was severely restricted. The unexpected alliance: Jonathan's opportunity to share his legacy project came through an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a prison psychologist who had been studying the mental health effects of supermax confinement as part of her doctoral research. Dr. Martinez was one of the few mental health professionals permitted to work with the ADX-Colorado inmates, and her conversations with Jonathan provided insights into the psychological impact of his architectural choices. Dr. Martinez recognized that Jonathan's perspective as both architect and inmate gave him unique qualifications to contribute to research on prison design and psychological health. She began including his observations in her academic papers, though without identifying him by name due to security restrictions. The collaboration between Jonathan and Dr. Martinez developed into a broader research project examining the relationship between architectural design and prisoner mental health. Their work documented the specific ways in which physical environment contributed to psychological breakdown and identified modifications that could maintain security while reducing psychological harm. Jonathan's architectural drawings and Dr. Martinez's psychological research began attracting attention from academics, reformers, and progressive correctional officials who were questioning the supermax model that Jonathan had helped create. At Justice System USA, we believe that redemption, is possible even for those who have caused tremendous harm. Jonathan Pierce's journey from architect of cruelty to advocate for humanity shows us that people can change even under the most challenging circumstances. The reform movement, the research collaboration between Jonathan and Dr. Martinez, became part of a broader movement questioning the psychological and ethical implications of supermax confinement. Legal challenges to prolonged solitary confinement were succeeding in federal courts, and several states were modifying their supermax facilities to reduce psychological harm. Jonathan's insider knowledge of ADX-Colorado's design provided crucial evidence for lawsuits challenging the facility's conditions. His documentation of the psychological effects of his own architectural choices helped convince federal judges that supermax confinement constituted cruel and unusual punishment for many prisoners. The reform movement faced significant opposition from correctional officials and politicians who argued that dangerous criminals deserved harsh treatment and that reducing security measures would endanger public safety. But Jonathan's expertise allowed reformers to propose alternatives that maintained security, while eliminating the most psychologically damaging aspects of supermax design. Jonathan's legacy project became a template for facility modifications that could satisfy both security requirements and constitutional standards for humane treatment. His architectural solutions demonstrated that protecting public safety did not require destroying prisoners' mental health. The personal reckoning. Jonathan's involvement in prison reform provided him with a sense of purpose and redemption, but it could not eliminate the fundamental reality of his situation. He remained a convicted murderer serving life without parole in a facility he had designed to be inescapable. His psychological evolution from architect of suffering to advocate for humane treatment represented genuine moral growth. But it did not change the fact that Marcus Webb was dead and that Jonathan had been convicted of killing him. The question of whether he was actually guilty of murder remained unresolved through the appeals process. Jonathan's daily existence continued to be shaped by the architectural choices he had made years earlier. Despite his new understanding of the psychological damage caused by supermax confinement, he could not escape the facility he had created or modify the conditions he had to endure. The irony of this situation provided him with motivation to continue developing humane alternatives to supermax design, but it also served as a constant reminder of the human cost of his previous work. Jonathan was simultaneously the victim and perpetrator of the system he had created. The ongoing impact. 7 years after his conviction, Jonathan Pierce continues to serve his life sentence at ADX-Colorado while contributing to research and advocacy efforts aimed at reforming supermax confinement. His work has influenced federal court decisions, state policy changes, and academic research on the relationship between prison design and psychological health. Several states have modified their supermax facilities based on recommendations derived from Jonathan's research, reducing the use of prolonged isolation and incorporating more humane design elements. While these changes cannot undo the suffering caused by decades of supermax confinement, they represent progress toward more ethical approaches to containing dangerous criminals. Jonathan's personal appeals remain unresolved. With his legal team continuing to challenge both his conviction and his sentence, new forensic evidence has raised questions about the original investigation. But the appeals process moves slowly and provides no guarantee of eventual vindication. The transformation from architect to advocate has provided Jonathan with psychological redemption that helps him survive the conditions he created, but it cannot restore the years he has lost or return him to the life he destroyed through his own choices. His legacy remains complex and contradictory, a man who created tremendous suffering but who may ultimately contribute to reducing such suffering for others. The architect who built the perfect prison has become its most effective critic, though he remains trapped inside the cage he created. The question of justice. Jonathan Pierce's story raises fundamental questions about justice, redemption, and the purpose of imprisonment. If he is guilty of murder, does his subsequent moral evolution matter? If he is innocent, does his previous work designing inhumane facilities affect his claim to justice? The facility that Jonathan designed to be inescapable has indeed proven impossible to escape, but it has not prevented the personal transformation that he claimed was impossible for the criminals it housed. His own experience contradicts the assumptions about human nature that justified his architectural choices. Whether Jonathan will ever be released from ADX-Colorado remains uncertain, but his impact on prison design and correctional policy continues to grow. The architect who once believed that some people deserved to be destroyed by their environment has become an advocate for the principle that all people retain the capacity for growth and redemption. His story serves as a reminder that the systems we create to control others ultimately shape us as well, and that the cages we build for our enemies can become our own prisons. This has been Justice System USA, where we explore the complex relationship between justice and revenge, between punishment and cruelty, and between the systems we create and the people they destroy. Jonathan Pierce's story reminds us that sometimes the most profound justice comes not from punishment, but from transformation. What did you think about Jonathan's journey from architect of suffering to advocate for humane treatment? Do you believe people can truly change, even after committing terrible acts? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what city you're watching from. If this story challenged your thinking about justice, redemption, and the purpose of imprisonment, hit that like button, share it with someone who appreciates complex moral questions, and subscribe to Justice System USA for more stories that examine the systems that shape American justice. Remember, the prisons we build for others often reveal more about us than about the people we can find within them. Until next time, consider whether the systems you support serve justice or merely satisfy the desire for revenge. See you in the next story.